Deep Sea Embers Chapter 141 to 150. Chapter 141 Inches Honest and Reliable Mr. Duncan. It turns out that in this world full of strange and supernatural things, the skill of spiritual healing was much more hardcore than Duncan had imagined. It's to the degree of exceeding the world, skill, and went straight for craft. Fortunately, Heidi's box of things wasn't prepared for Nina. The psychiatrist could see the horror on this uncle and niece's faces, which brought a smile to her own since this was one of the perks she had when doing her job. Fill this out first, she hands a printed form over to Nina. Breaking a sigh of relief, Nina visibly eases up. I thought these tools were for me. This is what I use for my job while working for the authorities and the church. Heidi grinned. I often have to deal with extremely bigoted and dangerous people whose brains are filled with heretical ideas. These tools are one of my means to pry open their minds. The more Duncan listened, the more he felt that there was something wrong with this. Likewise, Shirley, who was trying to reduce her sense of existence while unable to stop eavesdropping, subconsciously shrunk her neck back. She quickly hid further away while pretending to be dusting the shelves. So scary, it's so scary, this place is so scary, Mr. Duncan is scary as it is, why did an inquisitor decide to pop up here? And that Heidi, Shirley mutters to Dog using their mental connection. Dog's voice sounded equally as weak and frantic. How am I supposed to know why she's here? How could I have expected to be caught by a ghost captain on land? How do I know why an inquisitor is coming down here to be a guest? Who would believe any of this if told? I'm just a dark hound damn it. While secretly paying attention to the movement next to the counter, Shirley muttered some more with a sad face. Who can believe this? If you tell a fish they will die in a car accident one day, I bet they won't believe it either. Don't mention fish, I'm afraid of fish. Shirley was stunned, but asked anyways, when did you start being afraid of fishes? Stop talking to me for now. I don't want the Inquisitor to notice anything. Although in theory I'm hidden from her sight, I keep getting the feeling my abilities are out of touch when Mr. Duncan is around. Nodding in agreement, Shirley quickly put away her thoughts and hid herself behind the other end of the shelf cabinet. There's nobody around this area, so it's the perfect spot to be inconspicuous. Ads by PubFuture. At the same time, Nina had taken a look at the form placed into her hand. It's the typical routine of a psychological evaluation, which was no different from the forms that she usually filled out before taking occult classes at school or visiting museums. The difference here was that there were a few extra questions that were not often asked. While filling it out, she curiously asked, I heard you say your treatments are more professional, so I thought you wouldn't use this kind of form that ordinary doctors use. Filling out forms is just the basic part of psychometrics. What differentiates me from those half buckets is that their diagnosis often ends after filling out the form. Heidi smiled as she removed the amethyst pendant from her neck and fiddled with it. Mine on the other hand has only just begun when you fill out the form. Vanna's gaze unconsciously fell on Heidi's crystal pendant there, eyes growing curious as well. I always see you wearing this new trinket recently, do you like it a lot? Apparently, Heidi got taken by surprise over the comment. Looking down at the pendant in her hand, she shook her head as if seemingly remembering something. Not really, it's just that it's rare for my father to bring me a gift. Guess what, Vanna? This pendant was bought by my father from this very store. She specifically emphasized the word buy, as if to forcibly deny that this was just a free giveaway. It is indeed a store product here. I hope this pendant brings you good luck. Duncan nods from the side to confirm the story. This got Vanna even more intrigued. From her view, this item was clearly an imitation, so it baffled her. How can someone as well learned in history as Morris fall for this? Thankfully the Inquisitor had more brains than to blurt that out before Duncan. Exactly then, Nina had finished checking the form and handed it back to Heidi. I finished filling it out. Can you see what the problem is? I've done reading it while you were filling the page out, including the small, subtle changes in your expression during the act. Heidi stored the paper and said bluntly, you have a psychological trauma for many years. Has a lot of recent stress in your life caused it to resurface? Your strange dream eased up in the past 2 days because of the stress letting up, or did it get shifted somewhere else? Nina couldn't help but widen her eyes due to how much the doctor picked up. Then subconsciously, the girl glanced in her uncle's direction, her face a little hesitant due to the subject. We need a quiet and private environment for further spiritual relief and release, Heidi said, looking up at Duncan. Of course, this will first require the consent of your guardian and Miss Nina's own cooperation. Go upstairs. Duncan nodded and looked at Nina. Is that okay with you? I'm fine with that. Nina nodded very obediently and without objection. However, the tension in her eyes remained, which didn't go unnoticed by the doctor's keen observation. Don't worry, Nina, it's just a simple mental relaxation technique. You have nothing to worry about because there's nothing wrong with you. Only a little stress and anxiety that everyone has. Heidi gave off an aura of reassurance and confidence that easily elevated the tension. I don't think we will need any of my tools today. I'll start by asking you a few questions. Nina was completely relieved now. She nodded to Duncan before being led up to the second floor by Heidi. Ads by PubFuture. Finally, only Duncan and the Miss Inquisitor remained sitting across from each other at the counter while Shirley remained hidden behind the shelves. Today was the first time the Ghost Captain had met this lady in person after he left a mark on her by chance. He could perceive his mark growing stronger and stronger due to the close proximity, a sign that the flame inside Vanna's soul was being replenished. After realizing this, Duncan consciously controlled the growth of that imprint. He did not want this mark to be detected by the mysterious goddess behind her, which would cause him to lose this special node. While the Ghost Captain was curious about the status of a nun in this city, Vanna was actually also curious about this, Mr. Duncan, sitting across from herself. Without question, she was indeed here to accompany Heidi today. However, there's also another reason. There are too many suspicious points about the museum fire. Theoretically, it would be impossible to extinguish a fire that quickly. Heidi also saw a projection of a suspected sun fragment. Then there's Duncan, an ordinary person who rushed into a fire to save others without getting hurt in the slightest. Vanna didn't have tangible evidence to connect the clues together, but her intuition pointed toward this antique store. Mr. Duncan, Vanna broke the silence first with a calm expression. I have something I want to know about the fire in the museum, can I? Of course, Duncan nodded calmly. I was on the scene at the time and should be able to provide some information. Thank you for your cooperation, Vanna nodded slightly. When you rushed in to save everyone, the fire in the museum was still burning, right? That's right, Duncan nodded without hesitation because he didn't know how much information the Inquisitor in front of him had. A little bit of truth linked to some omitted details. There was a lot of fire, especially in the direction of the corridor leading to the main exhibition hall. Almost all of it was burning. But you ended up coming out unscathed, Vanna asked. Can you tell me what happened after you entered the museum? Duncan showed a contemplating face, and after 2 or 3 seconds of silence, he said unsurely, I also think it's incredible that I can come out alive, but the fire in the museum suddenly died down. Can you imagine that? It was not extinguished by the water gun outside, nor was it extinguished after the combustible material was burned, rather the fire itself just disappeared all of a sudden. Even the smoke was gone. He appeared amazed as he recited the lie in his voice, stretching out his hand to gesture here and there. This must be the blessing of the goddess, right? As soon as he finished that sentence, he heard a commotion from Shirley's side. It was the girl accidentally knocking down a wooden carving in the corner. Be careful. Duncan immediately turned his head and shouted like a real store owner, reminding his employees, the base of that thing has been dropped by me more than once, so it's just glue holding it together. Don't let it shatter. The goddess watches over everyone in the city-state. Vanna's expression subtly changed for the worse, her eyes meeting Duncan's. I can see that you really are an honest person. Duncan's expression was serious and calm. That is, of course, we can't be in this business unless we are honest. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 142 Inches Inquiry and Treatment. The expression on Duncan's face was very sincere, the kind that's filled with confidence and resoluteness that if I open the door to sell imitation fakes, then I will have you die clearly with this truth in mind. Vanna was obviously shocked by this level of calmness and remained stunned for the longest time before reacting. Your honesty is impressive indeed. Is there anything else you'd like to ask about that fire? Duncan didn't care about the strangeness in the other party's tone and bluntly asked with a relaxed expression. I heard afterward that the entire museum was blocked off that same day. Actually, We highly suspect that there are supernatural factors related to the museum fire. Vanna did not hide this from the man. In fact, she didn't need to because the news had already been spread publicly by City Hall, appealing to the citizens not to approach the museum square in the near future. For those living in Planned, the existence of supernatural things wasn't a secret at all, only that some truths and details are omitted when deemed necessary by the authorities. The fire subsided very quickly, far beyond common means. Mr. Duncan, can you please recall what you experienced that day? Did you really not see or hear anything unusual after entering the museum? No, Duncan frowned. In fact, I didn't have the energy to pay attention to what was happening in the fire at all. I was just a normal person, not a trained guardian after all. Speaking of this, he paused and raised his eyebrows. Does the church suspect that a few of us who escaped from the fire may be related to the supernatural factor behind the fire? It's my personal suspicion. Vanna got all serious in her face. I beg your pardon, but it is my duty as an inquisitor to be wary of all uncontrolled transcendent dangers hidden in the city-state. I am not implying you are the main culprit behind the fire, but whether the common individual like it or not, supernatural powers can contaminate a soul regardless of their will or awareness. My main concern today in coming is your safety. I understand. That made Duncan more at ease and frank now. To be honest, he couldn't be angry, for the young inquisitor was only doing her duty. Then have you noticed anything unusual from your observation? Any clues? I didn't find anything. Vanna shook her head. There is no remnant of unwanted powers here, and the distribution of auras flowing inside and outside the building is quite normal. I think you should be just some ordinary people who got mixed up with that event. Duncan thought about it and couldn't help but add, if not, why don't you check carefully again? What if there's a shadow hiding in some obscure spot and you didn't notice? This is for our safety after all. I have confidence in my judgment, Vanna said without waiting for Duncan to finish. Then straightening her chest with extra confidence, she firmly spoke, I have received the grace of the goddess, and my eyes are the most effective means of detection, especially during the day when no heretical power or shadow can escape my sight. Even the most adept evil gods and demons are unable to escape my eyes during these hours. Adds by PubFuture. As soon as Vanna's words came out of her mouth, she heard another loud bang, the signal that Shirley had finally dropped the carving at the cabinet and shattered it. N-O-V-E, in .c ohm. I wanted to see if I could put it in a safer spot, Shirley meekly cried out from an out-of-sight place. Just spare those things for now. It's okay if you just wipe the windows. Duncan said helplessly, his hands spreading out like some pained boss lecturing a worker. Then turning back to Vanna, you're right, I guess there isn't anything more to investigate. This kid looks like a hairy one, Vanna said casually as she glanced up at Shirley's skirt that was sticking out of a corner, and she seems a little nervous. This is her first day at work today, Duncan said truthfully, not a formal clerk yet, but a friend of my niece coming here to learn and to subsidize her family's income. Children of the lower city must earn their keeps at a much younger age. Vanna nodded in agreement, thinking that this was normal. Then she seems to have remembered something else and landed her gaze on Duncan again. In addition, I want to confirm another thing. After you all left the museum, did you feel any discomfort or have a nightmare? Duncan didn't answer immediately because someone did have a nightmare. In fact, it wasn't just Shirley, but he too because he had dived into that dream world to explore with the girl. Sure, Vanna was an upright lady with a positive image, but there was no way he could reveal this fact. In the eyes of the church and authorities, they're all heretics that must be burned at the stake. No, everything is fine, Duncan shook his head, but may I ask? What kind of nightmare will it be? If something similar happens to us in the past 2 days, I would like to confirm it as soon as possible and ask for help from the nearest church. It should have something to do with the flames, replied Vanna, and the scale is immense, with huge arcs erupting violently from a dark void. Considering the fact that you narrowly escaped from a near-death experience, it's likely you have suffered a short-term trauma in some way or form. The shadow may manifest itself in the form of your dreams. Ordinary folks cannot judge the difference, but as a transcendent, I advise you to seek help as soon as you dream of something similar. Duncan frowned. Erupting violently from the dark void, spectacular arcs of flame. Adds by PubFuture. It didn't sound like Nina's dream, nor was it Shirley's dream they experienced. If I had to connect it to something, Her description is more like something I know of. The sun fragment. Duncan pondered for a moment, carefully adjusting the wording within the framework of an enthusiastic citizen. Let me get this down. So this thing, is it related to the sun cultists that's been plaguing the newspapers recently? Those cultists seem to be engaged with something related to the sun and such. I wouldn't put it past them to set the museum ablaze in their crazy rituals. Vanna didn't think much about the question since it's common knowledge the church was tracking down the suntists after the recent sewer rituals. Then nodding. We can't rule out this possibility, but knowing is your limit, do not inquire too much about the matter. It's dangerous for ordinary folks to dive deep into this topic. As a high-ranking member of the church, Vanna knew all too well the dangers that came with forbidden knowledge. Merely knowing was enough to open a channel for those evil gods to seep into their world. By then, the host would become nothing more than a walking bag of flesh to infect others regardless of one's will. Naturally, Duncan did not take the initiative to mention his original reporting behavior if the suntists to the church either. Merely through their conversation here, he was already able to discern the truth and confirm his guess about that being the sun fragment. Is that how a sun fragment is supposed to look? A huge arcing flame, erupting violently in the dark nothingness. This was completely different from what Duncan had in mind. In his original draft of imagination, something like a sun fragment, which was chased by the suntists, should be something similar to an anomaly, a tangible and physical object or item that could be wielded. Duncan tried hard to match the description to anything he knew from Earth. Eventually, he came to the conclusion it mostly resembled what he knew as a solar flare. The expression on his face did not change much there, but his thoughts were riding high in waves. Holy shit, a sun fragment is literally a slice of the sun. At the same time, in Nina's bedroom on the second floor, Heidi had completed her regular questioning and guidance of the patient. She has roughly confirmed that Nina's dream was not an ordinary nightmare or a continuous dream caused by pure mental stress, but whether this dream could be harmful requires further determination. We may need a short and moderate hypnotherapy. Heidi picked up the amethyst pendant in her hand and said to the girl in front of her with a gentle voice. Don't be nervous, just follow my guidance and answer some questions. Chapter 143 Inches Hypnosis. Nina faintly gulped as she watched the crystal pendant swaying in Heidi's hand. Although the other party said to relax, this was her first time receiving hypnotherapy, therefore, it was always difficult to control her reaction. While her eyes were attracted by the swaying crystal, she also noticed that Heidi was wearing a seemingly simple stone bracelet on her wrist, which was woven together with tough silk rope and strung with many colorful stones. She also noticed many rune-like marks on the stones, something strange for a female trinket. Noticing Nina's gaze, Heidi jiggled her wrist with a smile. I am a student of the Truth Academy, following and serving the God of Wisdom, Lahem. Although I don't seem like it from the outside, but from a technical standpoint, I am a registered clergy. A clergy, not just a psychiatrist, but also a member of the Truth Academy. Nina has certainly heard of the Truth Academy since she's a student at one of their schools. Although its name sounds like an academy, but in fact, the real body of this academy was one of the 4 Orthodox churches in this world. Together with the Storm Church, the Death Church, and the Flame Bearers, these 4 organizations maintained the civilized order of the Deep Sea Age. But unlike the other 3 major churches, the Truth Academy did not have a strict faith system and was more inclined towards pure knowledge. They are the backbone of research and scientific progress, so they're the promoters of schools and universities instead of cathedrals and chapels. In addition, these scholars are by far the smallest in terms of numbers compared to the other 3 faiths, and the ones that do wear a marker that registered them as a true wisdom clergy was, to say, rarer than a diamond. At this moment, Heidi appeared glowing like a halo to Nina's eyes. This finally allowed the nervous student to ease up like a junior meeting a top honor graduate of the same school. Bluntly said, Nina went into full idol ogling mode. Of course, Heidi wouldn't miss the change in Nina's expression, but she didn't care about it. To the doctor, her status as an idol in the eye of her juniors didn't even register because that's how her brains worked. Continuing to fiddle with the crystal pendant in hand, she started to speak slowly, cooing with a hypnotic note, about your childhood. Just now, you mentioned your parents passing in an accident. Can you tell me about the details? The incident may have left a looming shadow over your heart. Actually, It's nothing I can't talk about. Nina thought and figured it was not worth hiding. I've told many people about this before, but everyone assumed I was hallucinating and mistaken as a child. 11 years ago, there was a factory leak in the 6th block, and many cultists destroyed the area before being arrested. Did you know that? Of course, Heidi nodded. I was only in my teens when it happened. Our family was staying near the crossroad when it occurred, and we happened to witness the first crowd of people flooding the streets and running over each other. Ads by PubFuture. Then do you remember a fire as well? Fire. Heidi tilted her head slightly and unconsciously stopped fiddling with the crystal pendant. What fire? See, you don't remember that fire either, but in my memory, a huge fire killed my parents. Yet, everyone says I am mistaken. Heidi silently listened to Nina's story until the end. Not once did she reject the version contrary to her own. Then with a faint nod, she took a good minute before continuing like she was also contemplating what to do next. So this should be the hidden shadow inside your heart. The fire you're so afraid of is the catalyst of your dreams. You've been suppressing the emotion, but you're afraid the flames will appear again and take away the people around you. This is the cause. Nina slowly nodded, not rejecting the assessment. Have you been under any pressure lately? Heidi asked. Academically, in life. Recent pressures may have amplified the long-standing haze in your heart. Nina fell silent for a moment before she replied with some hesitation. Maybe it's because my uncle's body has been unwell before. It's been getting worse and worse for a while, which worried me a lot. Speaking of this, she paused and quickly added, of course, his health is better now. I feel that I have also relaxed a lot, and I haven't had that strange dream in the past 2 days. Are you worried about your family's health? Heidi cooed thoughtfully, listening to the whispers of the now partially hypnotized girl across from herself. She didn't need to keep swaying the tool of her trade anymore because Nina had fallen down on the bed in a dreamy state. The crystal pendant was merely a distraction, while her words were the true source of the hypnosis. I can see that you have a hard life. You've kept the tension and anxiety in the back of your mind all by yourself. You don't want to burden those around you and ignored your own needs. But it's okay now. Relax and sleep. When you awake again, you will leave behind the stress in that dream and be refreshed. Ads by PubFuture. In a half-dreamy state, Nina's voice sounded softly, thank you. Heidi grinned at getting some result. Then in order to further improve Nina's state of deep relaxation, she casually brought up another question. By the way, your uncle was not in good health before, right? What disease did he have? I just saw that Mr. Duncan seemed to be in good health. Nina was silent for a much longer time this round before she spoke softly. It's just that his body is weak, he is now, totally fine. However, Heidi could no longer hear Nina's response. The moment she had asked the last question, the doctor was already lying at the end of Nina's bed, falling into a deeper dream than her own patient. On Heidi's right wrist, the hand-woven stone bracelet was faintly glowing due to one of the runic symbols activating. These symbols are often worn by the followers of the Truth Academy, representing the blessings from Lahem, the god of wisdom and foolishness. They may not have strong powers to fight the supernatural, but the scholars had other means, like using these runes carrying their god's power. N-O-Vel-B, in .C Ohm. After a few seconds of flickering, a red agate in the string of stones suddenly made a slight cracking sound and quickly disintegrated into dust before disappearing with the wind. After being left alone, Vanna continued asking Duncan several more questions. One to learn if she had missed any key details about the museum fire, the second to ensure Duncan hadn't been affected by the sun fragment. During the conversation, the rustiness and embarrassment of the first meeting gradually dissipated, and the scene's atmosphere became friendly and familiar. This allowed Duncan to sense the genuine concern of the female inquisitor sitting across from himself. It's not the feeling of an investigator trying to crack a case but the heartfelt emotion of caring for others. Whether this emotion was due to Heidi's connection or if it stretched to everyone in the city-state, his impression of the lady couldn't be any better despite their stance. Speaking of which, Miss Heidi and Nina have been up there for a while now, right? During the conversation, Duncan noticed the time and subconsciously glanced up at the stairs leading to the second floor. Indeed, Vanna also reacted to such a reminder and faintly frowned. Usually Heidi's treatment process is very fast. I don't think you can use Miss Heidi's usual treatment model as a standard. Physical hypnosis and kinetic anesthesia are very quick indeed, but I don't think she would go that path with my niece. The corner of Duncan's mouth visibly twitched at remembering those tools in the doc's med kit, but the two of them are taking quite a long time. Nothing will happen, right? Vanna shook her head. No, Heidi is a professional who has been strictly trained by the Truth Academy. She won't mess things up in a typical hypnotherapy and is mostly talking to Nina for treatment. I do admit she can be a bit eccentric when it comes to dealing with the paranoid cultist. You know, her attitude towards work is the same as someone going on holiday despite the criteria of her job. After saying the last bit, the Inquisitor suddenly got less confident about the matter and grew worried. Maybe it's best we go take a look ourselves. Duncan and Vanna both went up to the second floor together and came to Nina's room. But before they could knock on the door, their ears perked up on the same unexpected noise, two snoring sounds of the ladies inside. Chapter 144 Inches Vanna's Vigilance. I'm so sorry, I don't know how, Heidi apologized with embarrassment. As a senior psychiatrist and a professional who could complete all her studies under the strict standards of the Truth Academy, her embarrassment at the moment was indescribable. Seriously, when Vanna woke her up, Heidi almost fell over backwards, believing her professional life was over. However, at this time, Nina, who was sitting on the bed and had just woken up, was also confused. She didn't know what happened at all, only looking at the doc in confusion due to all the apologizing. Uncle, what happened? Why is Miss Heidi? The psychiatrist hypnotized not just you but herself as well and fell asleep. Duncan sighed with a helpless note and pointed to the bed corner that was still imprinted with the shape of a certain lady in the room. Her drool ran down to the floorboard. Despite saying it with a straight face, the comment literally sent Heidi into a spiral of shame. Poor her. She couldn't even lift her head anymore. Under this awkward and chaotic atmosphere, only Vanna managed to maintain a serious face. She glanced around the room for the first time, looking for and sensing something. Eventually, she sets her eyes on Heidi. Are you really okay? How did you end up falling asleep yourself during a therapy session? Listening to her friend's serious tone, Heidi gradually returned to her senses and picked up on the hidden meaning. Immediately frowning, she tries to recall the last moment. I don't believe I have a problem. It should be due to all the workload recently. Perhaps the relaxing atmosphere affected me more than I thought just now. But the treatment is complete, right? Vanna still seemed a little uneasy and asked again. Oh, of course, Heidi nodded without hesitation, confident in her own work. I asked Miss Nina some questions, and it was after she answered that I fell asleep. Duncan noticed Vanna's solemn expression and couldn't help but ask, is there something wrong? No, just a little worry from me about Heidi's condition. She's never done something like this before. Vanna shook her head, but I suspect it's like she says, she's too tired due to the recent extra workload. Her day off did get ruined by the museum fire after all. Ads by PubFuture. When Nina heard this, she immediately apologized to Heidi out of reflex. I'm sorry, it seems that I took up your precious resting period. No, there's no need to apologize, Heidi quickly waved her hand, and if we think about it differently, I did get a good night's sleep here. I haven't slept so soundly in a long time. Vanna confirmed this by eyeing her friend up and down. Then turning to peer out the window for the color of the sky. It's getting late, I believe we should also take our leave before night arrives. Don't you need a break? Duncan expressed concern as the owner of the place. Miss Heidi still looks a little tired. I'm much better. Heidi corked a flushed smile when she heard this. It's not safe to stay outside at night. I have to get home before the sun goes down, otherwise my father will be worried about me. Hearing this reason, Duncan didn't try to keep the ladies around. He first helped Nina out of bed, then turned to face the two guests. Then I'll see you two out. Keeping his promise, he sent Heidi and Vanna to the front door, where he saw the looming evening sun getting ready to rest for the day. Vanna started the steam core of the vehicle she drove over with. Apparently, the engine needed preheating like a boiler before it would properly run, which intrigued Duncan. However, before the ghost captain could inspect the machinery, Heidi had gotten closer and whispered a series of concerns. You are now a very competent guardian, but you seem to have neglected to take care of Nina for a while before. Her mental tension and anxiety arose from this reason, said the psychiatrist sincerely and directly. Of course, Now that her condition has been greatly relieved after this counseling, the situation will get better. But even the best treatment needs to be consolidated, and the best psychological healing can only come from the care of loved ones. Nina had mental tension and anxiety. And for some time too. Was it before I took possession of this shell? Duncan accepted this and nodded back to the doctor. He's sincere and thankful for the help. Thank you for coming today. I was indeed in a bad state for a while and neglected her health. Actually, I should be discussing this with you in further detail after the treatment. Sadly, today doesn't seem to be right timing. Heidi sighed and took half a step back. I will sort out the findings I discovered and write it all down in a letter. It will also include the follow-up suggestions for her care. Ads by PubFuture. The two special guests finally took their leave and left. Watching the eye-catching car that's not commonly seen in the lower city drift away in the orange-colored street of the evening, Duncan exhaled a long deep breath he's been holding in. Out of his expectations, the first face-to-face encounter with the church went far more smoothly and peacefully than he could imagine. And after Vanna and the two left, Shirley finally came out from the corner of the first floor. The girl looked nervously in the direction of the door, only daring to come up after seeing Duncan and Nina return. Are they really gone? No, vel, b, in c, ohm. Yes, they're gone, they're gone. Duncan glanced at Shirley, his tone sounding helpless at how cowardly this girl had gotten. Also, your behavior is too obvious. What are you thinking by hiding the entire time? To draw attention and arouse suspicion. Thank goodness the Inquisitor didn't overthink the matter. Because I'm scared. That's the Inquisitor. The strongest fighting force working under the church in this city. Shirley's eyes popped as if unable to comprehend how Duncan could remain so calm and unfazed. The highest-ranking clergy can order the guardians and patrols on a whim. If she gets even the slightest whiff of dog scent, she can have the entire city swamped down on our heads in an instant. Speaking of this, she paused and sighed again. Of course, it is normal that you don't understand my mentality. In the eyes of an existence like you, the Inquisitor is probably not much different from the priest in the community chapel. Nina looked at Shirley, then turned her head in the direction where Vanna and Heidi had left. She frowned at the strange conversation. Shirley, will you really be arrested by the church? You obviously didn't do anything bad, and Lady Heidi and Vanna are also very good people. It doesn't matter if I do bad things or not, Shirley sighed. The church won't arrest all of the wild transcendents because there are always going to be those exposed to the supernatural for various strange reasons. However, that doesn't mean they won't keep tabs on these wild ones like me after discovering my existence. I don't want to lose my freedom. Nina frowned and couldn't grasp Shirley's logic. To her, reporting to the authorities was normal, even though she hadn't done it herself. Nina, how are you now? Duncan asks from the side, interrupting the thoughtful girl. Me. I'm fine, Nina answered immediately. I think Miss Heidi's treatment is quite effective. After chatting with her for a while and taking a little nap, I feel much more relaxed. Is that so? Then I'm relieved. Ads by PubFuture. Duncan nodded slightly and did not say anything else. Walking towards the stairs, he only then noticed Shirley, who seemed to react suddenly by glancing out the window. I had wanted to go home today, she cries with a sad note. Keep that idea as a thought only. Duncan didn't look back. Do you really plan to fight with the guardians of the church at night? Nina also chuckled and stepped forward to pat Shirley on the shoulder. Just stay here for another night. We can even take this chance to chat at night. On the way back to the upper city, Vanna held the steering wheel firmly while Heidi yawned in the passenger seat. Oomph, that nap was so good. Heidi yawned again and said casually, so, how did things go on your end? Did the store owner show anything wrong with him? There is nothing out of the ordinary, Vanna replied while keeping an eye on the road ahead. The store owner is just an ordinary person. The same goes for that little girl named Shirley. I couldn't sense anything from the shop or the presence of supernatural power or will. They should be fine, and it's you I'm worried about. Did you discover anything while talking to Nina? Everything is normal on my end too, Heidi nodded as well. She then raised her hand to stroke the crystal pendant that was hanging around her neck and noticed that one of the beads around her bracelet had gone missing, but Nina mentioned something when she was under my hypnosis. It's a little weird. Weird? What do you mean? She mentioned a fire when she was a child, a fire related to the factory leak 11 years ago, Heidi said casually. But you know it too, there wasn't anything 11 years ago. As soon as she was halfway through speaking, a sharp breaking screech accompanied by the vibration of the body interrupted her words. Vanna had stomped on the brake and turned to face her friend with wide eyes. Fire. Nina said she remembered a fire 11 years ago. Yes, Heidi was a little stunned by the strong response. Why are you making such a huge reaction? Vanna didn't speak for a while, only her face showing the swirling emotions running inside. Heidi naturally sensed the change and got worried. Do you want to turn around and go back now? We can ask. No. Vanna shook her head abruptly after pondering the idea. The car started again, and in the darkening sky, the scenery on both sides of the neighborhood gradually accelerated and receded away. I know you're confused and curious, but until I say more, don't mention this to anyone. I need to confirm something first. Vanna paused for a moment and then murmured as if she were talking to herself. Perhaps, we came in a bit of a hurry today. Chapter 145 Inches Heidi and her family. Heidi wisely didn't pursue the matter. The doctor knew she was different from Vanna. Although they're both clergy, in name and even had a registered certification from the Truth Academy, she was better at research than confronting those dangerous forces head-on. Sure, this technically fell into her field of specialty, but her work was all conducted under controlled conditions. Unfortunately, that wasn't it. Vanna, on the other hand, was well suited for this matter. She's been confronting the heretics for many years. She knows the ins and outs of what's permissible during tense situations. If Vanna says not to ask, then you don't ask. Towards the last stretch before home, Heidi finally threw out a question she assumed safe. Is there a problem with that antique shop? Everything is fine in the antique shop. Vanna controlled the car to slow down, her face still thoughtful, but in our city-state, something abnormal may be taking place. The sky had entirely darkened by then, and the bells and whistles that alternate between day and night had started to ring from the central steam core. It's also the signal for the street lamps to come on. When Heidi arrived outside her home, Vanna's car had already started to depart and was quickly out of earshot. Unlike her friend, that's limited by the curfew, the Inquisitor doesn't rest at night. Not only did Vanna have to make another trip down to the cordoned-off museum and meet the guardians, but she also had to return to the main cathedral for paperwork. Even on her days off, Vanna's never truly resting. Heidi sighed again at recalling her own day being ruined. But a sigh was a sigh. She was not going to wait to enter her home. With a click of the lock, the doctor entered the spacious living room that was lit with electric bulbs at the ceiling. It's quiet as usual, and the day maid had retired to her own place after finishing the dishes. Bluntly said, the vast house seemed a little deserted right now. But Heidi has been used to this. Her father was someone that's hard to pull out of the study once he's invested, and her mother's health hadn't been good, so expecting a warm welcome was out of the question. Even so, that doesn't mean there's no human scent in this big house. Their family relationship has always been good, in fact. Changing out of her coat and storing away the med kit, she glanced around and found the study room to be lit. Her father was likely reading something. Without disturbing the master of the house, Heidi came to her parents' bedroom and knocked on the door. I'm back, are you inside? Her mother's voice came from the other side of the door with a sense of helplessness and a little pretended anger. Why did you come back so late tonight? Heidi stuck out her tongue at the door and quickly sorted out her expression. Then pushing it open, she strolled inside while muttering her excuse. I went out with Vanna so you don't have to keep worrying about me. She can easily best the entire city with one hand behind her back. Ads by PubFuture. The lighting in the room was dim here because strong lighting would irritate her mother's eyes, which had been in poor condition after being injured by chemical fumes from the factory leak 11 years ago. Heidi swiftly adjusted to the dim lighting and saw her mother sitting on the head of the bed. It's a very kind old lady sitting there in a pair of soft pajamas and weaving a unique craft of plant. You're always running around with Vanna. Sooner or later, you won't be able to marry like her. I know it, you can't fool me. She's been running to the marriage center every weekend, hoping to get paired with a man that fits her requirements. The church has been getting complaints every day because of that. The expression on Heidi's face visibly stiffened. Don't say that, Vanna is an inquisitor now. So what if she's the inquisitor? She's still the same lass that's been eating at our house for several years. It's all because of her uncle after he became the city admin. All that man cares about is the city's affairs. That's why Vanna didn't get the right upbringing of a proper lady. The old mother babbled on and on as usual, her hand gesturing never once stalling. If I were Vanna's uncle, I would have run to the church and demand they remove the oath placed on his niece. Most nuns only make one oath during the baptism ceremony. How could Vanna do 3 big ones? It's all because of those 3 oaths that she can't marry anyone even at this age. Listening to her mother's string of moaning and ranting, Heidi could only chuckle with embarrassment. Finally, after the old lady managed to catch her breath and stop for a bit, the daughter knew it was her chance to change the topic. You're almost finished with the weaving. Yes and no. I've weaved and disassembled it several times already. It's always something that I can't get right. The old mother smiled, showing Heidi her splendid ribbon woven with fine silk. The intricate workmanship was embellished with colorful stones and beads, a gift one wouldn't find in just any shop, for it's rumored to ward off evil spirits. I wonder if I can find a good young man for you once I'm finished. Heidi glanced at the nearly completed knotted ribbon and cautiously suggested, if not, why don't you dismantle it again? Maybe it'll be time by then. You're upsetting me on purpose. Heidi quickly changed stance and skedaddled out of there, all the while her mother's nagging chant continued to echo out from the rear. She's used to having her mother press for marriage, so it's nothing new. Nimbly closing the door before leaving, the doctor was ready to grab something from the kitchen when she bumped into her father in the hallway. I heard the sound of you coming home earlier. Did you upset your mother again? Morris asks, his elegant demeanor of a gentleman showing again. Nobelbjn.c ohm. Heidi quickly waved her hand. No, just some small talk. And about my gift, did you hand it to Mr. Duncan? I delivered it. Mr. Duncan is very happy. Heidi nodded and then couldn't help but cast a peek at her father across the hallway, but I really didn't expect that you would be willing to give away your beloved collection. Ads by PubFuture. It's just a collection. He did save your life after all, Morris lightly states. In fact, I don't even think it's enough. I'll have to go back in 2 days to thank him. The reference promptly caused Heidi to flush with embarrassment due to the reminder of giving Nina hypnotherapy today. Is there really a need to be so formal? It's not a matter of being formal or not. Mr. Duncan saved your life, and I am not only your father but also Nina's teacher. What's more, Mr. Duncan is also an antique dealer who is eager to learn. From a social point of view, this relationship is worth nurturing, Morris casually explained. I like the word that Mr. Duncan often says, it's a kind of fate. Okay, your idea makes sense, it makes perfect sense. Heidi suddenly had a headache coming after hearing her father's reasoning. To her, socializing has never been a skill of hers, and now she's being stuffed with a bunch of social etiquettes that were of no use in the therapy room. Then at least keep your visit to just a visit, don't buy random things again, okay? It depends on whether there are any items that appeal to me, Morris said casually. Then he thought for a moment and asked as if the question only came to him now, so, did you go with Vanna today? Ah yes, she happened to be off today. We took her car. Morris mused for a second like he's hesitating on his next words. I get the feeling you're getting very close to Vanna. Am I? I've been close to her for many years, haven't I? Heidi felt that the question was a little inexplicable and random. We've known each other since childhood. No, I'm just. The old gentleman gulped and recalled the quote from Mr. Duncan during his last visit. It's also possible for an all-girls school. Father. Heidi made a weird look, unable to comprehend the bizarre behavior of her father. Ah, forget what I said. Morris jolted back to attention, realizing how outrageous his inner fantasy was behaving. Quickly changing the topic to avoid any misunderstanding, the corner of his gaze suddenly fell upon Heidi's wrist. On the bracelet, which represents the protection of Lahem, the god of wisdom, a red agate was missing. The old man's expression instantly got paler. However, as a well-learned scholar, he knows better than to panic in this situation. Forcibly controlling his mood, he calmly asks again like it's a casual question. Heidi, did you accidentally drop a bead from your bracelet? I notice there's an open spot on the string. My bracelet. Heidi blinked, then raised her wrist and took a look for herself. Isn't it supposed to be like this? I thought it was always missing one. Always missing one. Morris pressed his heavy panting down. Right now, There's a surge of hard emotions overwhelming his mind, for the worst possible outcome had just come true. By the way, you only went to that antique shop today, right? He asks again with his usual tone, trying hard to get any information he could without alarming anyone, friend or foe. Chapter 146 Inches Ashes. Heidi didn't notice anything unusual in her father's tone. Yes, she nodded calmly. Me and Vanna went to Mr. Duncan's antique shop today. I managed to have a nice chat with him and performed hypnotherapy for Nina. We returned right afterward. No, vel, b, in c ohm. The doctor hesitated briefly at the end, wondering whether to tell her father about the fire she had heard from Nina and Vanna's strange reaction over it. However, after recalling her friend's abnormally serious expression in the car, the lady halted this idea. There may be dangerous hidden forces involved behind this incident, and it may be so serious that if she speaks of it, it may attract prying eyes. Although her father was the same as herself, he was also a follower of truth who serves the God of wisdom. They're both more of a scholar than a true transcendent fighter. It's not good for a person of learning to deal with those dangerous things directly. Morris still had a gentle and calm expression on his face when he nodded slightly. Then, speaking casually like it's not intended, so you stayed over there for quite a while. Did you lose track of time by chatting with Mr. Duncan? See, did I not say he's a person thirsty for knowledge? Oh, that's not it. Heidi's face suddenly grew a shade of blushed red. It's just that, I wasted a little time when I hypnotized Nina. When hypnotizing Nina, Morris heard his student's name and timely raised an eyebrow. Did it not go well? Is her mental state that terrible? Was it affected by the previous fire at the museum? Heidi couldn't help but roll her eyes when she heard her father's long series of questions. You really care about that student of yours? Don't worry, she's doing well. That girl was just a little anxious, and after my counseling, she's completely fine and won't be affected during the final exams. The delay I'm referring to is about something else. Morris now sounded curious. Oh, aha, maybe I'm a little too tired lately. Heidi dryly laughed with more embarrassment. I fell asleep as well when hypnotizing her and slept until the evening. You fell into a deep sleep yourself while hypnotizing Nina. Morris's expression finally changed slightly, but he quickly regained control as per his protocol. It's not like you. Everyone can be negligent at times, not to mention I have been deprived of a proper vacation in a long while. Heidi waved her hand impatiently. Aya, don't ask, I'm already an adult. You and mother are always like this when I come back late. I'm not a kid anymore, you know. There's no need to always act so worried. Morris kept staring at his daughter for several seconds more before breaking out his usual polite laugh of a scholar. Of course, I won't keep asking like this the next time. Come, dinner is already waiting for you in the kitchen. Hurry and go warm it up. I still have to go see your mother. Okay. Heidi nodded and scurried for the kitchen, only to swing her head around before the hall corner. By the way, are you planning to visit the antique shop later? Yes. Morris was already standing in the doorway of the bedroom, the dim light from the wall of the corridor casting a mottled shadow on his old face. Is there something wrong? I left in a hurry today, so I didn't get to discuss things properly with Mr. Duncan. If you're going to visit, help me pass on a letter of assessment to him about Nina, okay? No problem. Morris nodded, and then, as if speaking to himself, he muttered softly, I definitely need to visit again. Heidi had left, but the gray-haired old historian remained standing quietly at the doorway. He seemed to be deep in thought, and after nearly a dozen seconds, he finally exhaled a long soft sigh and pushed open the dull wooden door. The bedroom was still dimly lit, with only a small wall lamp to act as the light source. Morris carefully turned the lock behind himself, ensuring no one could come inside during this moment. Beloved, are you okay? He slowly paced over to the bedside and softly asked the pile of wriggling ashes with a human-shaped outline. As if to respond, a subtle static buzz came from the blurred ashen human outline, constantly floating and wriggling as it did so. Yes, how beautiful. Your craft has always been very good, Morris replied in a small murmur and praised his wife's weaving skills as he watched the nearly completed ornamental ribbon. The one you made for me is still hanging in my study room. For the next while, no words were exchanged, only a silence that would drive any occupant into a discomfort daze. Eventually, after a few minutes of this awkwardness, Morris broke it and spoke his woes. Heidi went out today. When she returned, I saw that one of the red agates on the bracelet was gone. The ash on the bed suddenly came to a frozen standstill, followed by a low static buzzing of a troubled squirming. It's not certain what happened exactly. If it was a protection from Lord Lehem, then it could only mean Heidi encountered a danger that could penetrate her inner sanity. Morris slowly explained his reasoning. But from the way things look, I suspect she only passed by something without being aware of it. The bracelet likely activated without intention. Morris abruptly stopped and listened to the static buzzing that cut in. Yes, I reminded Heidi about her bracelet. But when she saw the problem, she assumed the agate was always missing in the first place. Morris nodded in agreement with the ash as it wriggled around. It's a self-protective measure, perhaps from her mind or the blessing of Lehem himself. In any case, this protection prevented her from learning about something. Another burst of static buzzing came from his wife's ashen form, this time more agitated and frantic. I want to investigate, of course. I must find out for myself what's going on. The last sentence brought an uncomfortable silence to the ash on the bed. Morris shook his head. I understand, my love. There may be a little risk involved with my decision, but this is our daughter. I have to go. Don't worry, I will pray for divination in advance. In fact, I had already visited that antique shop before and met the owner. The man is diligent, and his niece is a studious child and one of my students at school. There was no malicious evil hovering in there. So, if the risk factor was in the shop today when Heidi visited, then the owner of that shop could also be threatened. My students live there. As a teacher and servant to the God of wisdom, I must. Morris stated in a wistful voice that was so full of emotions that it hurt. Then the pair listened to each other's suggestions and various ideas on what to do. No, we can't alarm the cathedral about this matter. While they may be more effective, their overly aggressive style could also hurt my student. The priority of suppressing heresy and eradicating evil is too high for the guardians of the church, and... Speaking of this, Marston let out a soft sigh before continuing. And, I really don't want to attract the attention of the cathedral. After all, I am a heretical accomplice who has been shaken in my belief. His voice fell into a depressing low, those eyes never leaving the mass of ash that was his wife, who died 11 years ago in the fire. In response, the human-shaped ash slowly rose upward and reached out, forming a tentacle-like form that's supposed to be an arm to gently brush the old gent's face. I know. Morris lowered his head and spoke in a confessing manner. I am a man whose faith has wavered. I'm a coward who refuses to fully fall into degeneration. Lehem gave me the eyes to see through delusions, but I closed them on my own will to make an unrealistic wish come true. I wanted to keep you in this world, but couldn't fully deceive myself. Instead, I forced you and I into this shameful situation. He raised his head and gently gripped the fluttering wisp of ash, only to have his fingers bypass the dust. I wish I knew nothing like Heidi. This way, I could at least see you again, touch you again. I haven't been able to see how you look for 11 years now. This time, only a soft rubbing of particles came from the ash, the version of the woman weeping. I understand, all this will eventually end. After all, every show has an ending at some point. No matter what it is that responded to my wish, it will eventually come collect its price. I am ready for that. When it comes, I will ensure my clean disappearance from this world. Even if it's a shadow of subspace, I won't allow it to invade reality through this wish. Morris raised his head and stared at the silhouette of ash in the dim light. But until that day comes, just stay with me for a while longer. Chapter 147 Inches appeared in the real world. Uncle Duncan, I'm going to school. Amidst the cheerful greeting, Nina sprinted down the stairs, turned around and waved in the direction of the second floor before going towards the main doorway. The off days are over, and today was another day to go to school again. But before she reached the door, Nina suddenly stopped, noticing a shaking, shivering figure hiding behind a shelf not far away. It's Shirley, who came out of hiding. Ah, Shirley, Nina stood there happily and beckoned to the girl. I was wondering where you were. Do you want to go together? Together. Shirley blinked in confusion. Where together? School, of course. Today is, Nina said subconsciously, only to realize her blunder halfway through. Making a slightly embarrassed expression. Ah, sorry, I forgot. Shirley wasn't her classmate nor attended the school, and the pleasant experience of spending time on campus was just an act. Nina knew it herself, yet the girl would still occasionally forget this fact. The expression on Shirley's face also became weird for a while, and her eyes showed an apology again. However, she quickly recovered and shook her head slightly. I won't go with you. My investigative activities have been completed at that school. I guess so. Nina pursed her lips, quickly returning to her usual smile. Sorry, I forgot. So I'll go first. Shirley nodded, but then remembering something, she added, by the way, Nina, I'm going home today. Ads by PubFuture. Going home. Nina was stunned for a moment. It seems that in the span of only 2 days, she has taken Shirley as a member of this place for granted. Therefore, when the young lady heard this news, she had to take a good moment to process it. Are you not staying here anymore? I have to go home. My stay here had always been temporary. Shirley waved her hand, saying what she had long wanted to say. I told Mr. Duncan too, and he agreed. Nina didn't say anything for a while, acting like she's fallen into a shocked daze. Eventually, after a few seconds of spluttering, she managed to come out of it. Will you come back in the future? As long as it is possible, I really don't want to come in the future. If possible, I want to steal a boat ticket and hide over at the Frost City State. The idea of running away flashed within Shirley's mind, but then she seemed to sense a gaze falling on her body from the second floor. Shrinking her neck, she quickly corrected her train of thought. I will come and find you if there's an opening in the future. My home isn't far away anyways, ha ha ha. Nina tilted her head, finding the behavior strange. Nevertheless, she quickly dropped the notion and got all happy again. To her, it's good enough with the promise. Waving her hand cheerfully, she turned and ran out the front entrance, disappearing from view after turning around the street corner. Shirley watched the other girl zooming off with a sort of daze at how quickly the attitude changed. Then suddenly, her instincts brought her back to attention after noticing the certain figure standing at the stairs behind herself. Cap. Good morning, Mr. Duncan. She jerked to rigid attention, greeting the owner of the shop with a rarely used polite greeting in her repertoire. You're much more polite now. This is what a girl your age should look like, Duncan said lightly, slowly walking down the stairs as he did so. Did you finish explaining it to Nina yet? Are you going home today? Yes. I explained it to her clearly. Shirley lowered her head, her voice not daring to be too loud. You also agreed. I can leave today. Why are you nervous again? Yesterday you were fine. Do you reset your tension every morning or something? Duncan shook his head with a helpless smile and stepped forward to pat Shirley's slightly thin shoulder. Relax, I never said that I wanted to imprison you somewhere. I invited you to be a guest here so you can naturally go back when you want to go back. Of course, you can also come here any time you like. I know, Shirley nodded repeatedly, then deflated in a frustrated manner. Truth is, I am not that nervous inside like you think. This is all Dog's doing. Whenever you get too close to me, he will instinctively tense up and transmit the emotion to me. Ads by PubFuture. Oh Dog, well then, guess there's no way around it then. Perhaps it's due to a shadow demon's keener sense of perception. Duncan shrugged and looked down at the petite girl, but why don't you think about it? You can really stay here if you like. The place where you and Dog is living sounds to me a bit rudimentary and unsafe at night. A subspace shadow claiming his lair was a safer place to live was simply unfathomable, borderline outrageous even. In the end, Shirley could only start giggling like an idiot after losing her vocabulary. That. Forget what I said then, I'm just mentioning it to you. Don't get riled up over it. Duncan knew his words alone wouldn't be able to change the girl's mind, especially with Dog's emotions being so negative. If you want to leave then go ahead. You already know how to contact me anyways. Be sure to call me whenever you find new clues about these scientists. Shirley nodded silently. After 2 dreamlike days of this life, she finally got permission to leave here, got the chance to escape this terrifying being, but when this opportunity really appeared, she suddenly found herself at a loss. Chatting and frolicking with a friend, living under the care of an elder, warm bedroom, bright lights, delicious food, and a peaceful life without fear of nightmares or hiding from the guardians. Now, she's allowed to leave. Yet, for some reason, she got this ridiculous idea that the bright world which she sought was having its door closed to her again. Our lives are going back on track, surely. In the midst of the spiritual connection, she suddenly heard Dog's low muttering. Yes, it's time to get back on track, Shirley muttered softly in her mind. Then she looked up and wanted to say goodbye to Mr. Duncan to find the man's expression getting serious. In the dark, Duncan had sensed a flash of aura in the distance. This signal was one of the marks he left behind. Mr. Duncan, Shirley nervously asks. I sensed an aura. Duncan spoke softly without waiting for Shirley to finish. He stared off into the direction. It seems to be coming from that direction. N-O-V-E, in .c ohm. Ads by PubFuture. Shirley didn't react at once. An aura. It's the small fire I left for that little bug. Duncan lowered his head slightly and looked into Shirley's eyes. Do you remember the umbrella freak who attacked you on the edge of your dreams? Shirley was stunned for a moment, and her eyes widened suddenly. Is it the piece you sent home? But wasn't that in the dream world? Yes, it was an attacker who appeared in the dream world. Duncan's tone grew meaningful, but now I perceived that mark in the real world. Shirley's eyes widened, and she suddenly thought of what Mr. Duncan had said to herself in that nightmare. Perhaps it wasn't just a dream. Shirley, Duncan's voice came suddenly, interrupting the girl's memory. Before you go home, do you want to take another adventure with me? Of course, if you don't. I do, Shirley replied immediately without waiting for the other party to finish speaking. Her attitude was so firm that even she was startled. Then, as if to ease the embarrassment, she explained, that thing appeared on the street after the fire. It must have something to do with the event 11 years ago. Duncan pressed Shirley's shoulder. Then we'll go together. But how do we get there? Shirley took a soft breath. Can you be sure of the exact location of that thing? We're not going to take the bus like last time again, right? Duncan smiled and shook his head. I have a more convenient mode of transportation now. Shirley was stunned for a moment. But just as she was about to ask what kind of convenient transportation method, a small shadow suddenly swooped down from the staircase of the second floor and perched itself on the man's shoulder. To the Erxian Bridge, walk Chunghwa Avenue, big seat. There's a big seat in the back, melon seed snack and mineral water. Keep your feet on your side. Shirley nearly fell over backward after hearing that sharp chirpy rambling. Then after a quick stumble, she finally recognized who it was. The strange dove that could eat French fries the size of herself in one meal. Under the girl's shocked gaze, I circled in the air again, unleashed the burning green flame around herself, and transformed into her undead skeletal form. Shirley. She rigidly turned to face the man, only to be silenced by the flash that took her by surprise in the next. Under Eyes Express delivery service and belt-buckling yapping, the tiny vortex of flame dashed out of the antique shop and flew off into the distance. Chapter 148 inches superimposing. A swift shadow swept through the old and dirty streets of the lower city, through the pipes and pressure relief structures crisscrossing the factory cluster, through the desolate stations and deserted streets, and finally into a narrow alley. The green flames bloomed, spreading wantonly in the air like a door until they swelled big enough to allow Duncan to step through the portal. She was promptly followed by Shirley, who was still a little blindsided by what's occurred. Duncan glanced back at the girl behind him, looking up and down before he spoke in a deep voice. How does it feel? Is there any discomfort? I'm okay. Shirley was still dizzy, but this dizziness was more of a disorientation caused by being abruptly carried by the big boss than physical discomfort. She looked up at I, who had returned to the form of a white dove and landed on Duncan's shoulder. After a long time, she suddenly used her spiritual contact to communicate with Dog hiding in her soul. Dog, can you beat this dove? Quote. Don't ask. Even if you ask, I can't beat it. Dog's voice sounded muffled. Forget the bird raised by this big boss, even the fish stew is out of my league. Shirley was stunned. Why did you suddenly mention fish stew? Because I can see that there is probably nothing in line with common sense around this being. Duncan didn't know that Shirley was muttering to Dog in secret. First confirming there was nothing wrong with the girl using the mark he placed on her, the man eventually sighed in relief after confirming she was alright. He didn't use the girl as a test subject. In fact, he's already tested the transportation with various live animals beforehand, all of which were perfectly fine afterward. Even so, he didn't want to wantonly ignore Shirley's health. Once done with the health check, Duncan shifted his attention to the surrounding environment. At the end of the street, he could vaguely see the dilapidated streetscape. The plumbing facilities that have been in disrepair crisscrossed along the houses on both sides, and some of the pipes have tiny steam coming out of their connections. It's hissing and leaking. No-vel-b, in .c ohm. This was a common sight in many parts of the lower city. But Shirley still recognized this place right away. Ads by PubFuture. This is the 6th block. Her eyes widened in some surprise. Mr. Duncan, did you sense that mark here? That's right, Block 6, we're back here again, but. Duncan exhaled, then frowned slightly, but the imprint faded a minute ago. Quote. Faded. Is it extinguished? Shirley asked with a look of surprise, but Duncan didn't answer, only staring thoughtfully in a certain direction. In Shirley's dream, he had implanted a cluster of flames into the remaining blob of the attacker. The order was to return to its main body. Then soon after, the connection ended until now with the mark reappearing in the real world. If there are many coincidences, then it's no longer a coincidence. Nina's dream, Shirley's nightmare, the mark appearing at the 6th block, all these clues pointed to the invisible curtain here. There must have been something they overlooked the last time they visited. Narrowing his eyes, Duncan didn't believe the flame he had left behind had been extinguished. Although he couldn't pinpoint the exact location, the faint feedback told him it was still burning. Since the flame was still burning and growing, it meant that its mission wasn't over, it was still chasing, devouring, and assimilating the attacker. Perhaps, it may have even grown into a huge fire outside of reality. He wanted to find this gap that was out of his view, the gap that seemingly connected dreams and reality. That abandoned factory is in the other direction. Halfway through, Shirley raised her arm and pointed to a large building in the distance. We're not going to that factory, Duncan said quickly, let's go this way. Oh, Shirley answered, jogging her short legs to keep up with Duncan. The withered and yellow leaves drifted with the wind and fell at Shirley's feet. As she stepped on the fallen leaves, she heard a slight crackling sound that was similar to a burning ember. Around them were nothing but ordinary streets. The old houses lined up along the sides, standing in the wind and facing indifferently at the uninvited guests who intruded here. But then, Shirley noticed something was wrong, there was no pedestrians on the street. Ads by PubFuture. The 6th block was indeed deserted compared to the other parts of the city. In fact, it's borderline listless, cold, and withdrawn. But by no means should it be like this without a single soul in sight. A very uncomfortable feeling permeated from the bottom of her heart. This gave Shirley the exact same sensation of being trapped inside her nightmare again. Out of a desire for protection, she subconsciously got closer to Duncan until she accidentally bumped nose first into the man's waist. In the next second, Shirley drew up the full text of curse words in her dictionary. It seems that we have arrived. Duncan's calm voice interrupted the girl's momentary crankiness. I'm very, very sorry. I really didn't mean to, please. Wah. Shirley subconsciously popped up a string of begging mercy when she came back to attention, only to realize they had stopped before an abandoned building. It was a chapel, a community church, which could be found everywhere in the city-state of Planned, stood at the end of the path. It has all the hallmarks of the Storm Church, an elongated spiraling structure with black roof tiles and white stone bricks. However, the hanging vines and decaying dirty attachments told a story of abandonment. It was once a sacred building, but now the smell of decay and forgottenness filled every crack in its brickwork. Quote. This is the church mentioned by the old man near the intersection last time. Shirley recalled the last time she visited this place. I remember he said there was a nun living here, but that nun was often not in the church. It's not a frequent absence that can be explained by the level of ruin like this, Duncan said casually, striding toward the church gates. It's not so much that the nun goes out often, but that this place seems to have been forgotten for 11 years. Shirley watched as the other party walked towards the church, instinctively resisting the building and not wanting to follow. However, she eventually followed suit after overcoming the momentary hesitation. The next moment, Duncan pushed open the half-covered church door to reveal the scene inside. Warm and bright candlelight fell into Shirley's eyes, and the clean chapel was brightly lit, unlike the forsaken appearance outside. At the end of the neatly arranged benches, the statue of the goddess of storms, Gomona, stood quietly in the light. A nun kneeling in prayer had stood up after hearing the noise. It has been a long time since anyone visited this church. The nun smiles warmly with arms spread open. Oh, it looks like this is indeed the spot, Duncan said softly with a calm expression as he observed the smiling nun in front. The gap in the curtain. He blinked. In his eyes, the smiling nun maintained a living appearance at one moment but turned into a bunch of humanoid wriggling ashes at the next. Meanwhile, the church behind her showed a strange superposition state. The flames were burning on the intact benches, ashes and sparks drifted from the roof, and the fire scene had interlaced with this calm reality. It was as if two very different realities had been forcibly merged in this church. Chapter 149 Inches behind the curtain. This gave Duncan a feeling that two diametrically different histories had once existed here at the church. The inside remained frozen in the past while the outside continued to move forward with time. It was neither destroyed nor survived that fire. So, does the nun here know anything? It's been a long time since anyone visited this church, the nun in a black priest's robe repeated softly. She raised her head with a smile, but her gaze seemed to pass through Shirley and Duncan. Where do you come from? Unfamiliar faces, you are not residents here. In front of the bright and warm scene, Shirley shrank her neck back the nun's smiling gaze. She felt a chill for some reason and whispered nervously to Duncan. Why do I think this place is weird? It looks so dilapidated from the outside, but the inside. Duncan didn't answer, just casually patting Shirley's shoulder. Based on the girl's reaction, he had guessed that the other party could only see one side of the picture and didn't see the other. In this case, it's difficult to explain his findings. Of course, there was Dog, who had a better perception of reality, but until he figured out the nun's identity and threat meter, it was best to keep Shirley from summoning the Dark Hound. We're passing through only, Duncan said calmly to the nun with an unchanging expression, just like a normal visitor to the church. Have you been here all this time? Me. I have been living in this church, the nun nodded lightly. I have been praying here, praying to the great existence. But the people on the block said that the nun in the church hadn't returned for a long time, Duncan added, observing the nun's reaction in front of him. They said that the church was neglected and seemed abandoned. The nun listened quietly to Duncan's words, but there was no violent reaction as if her heart had eternally fallen to rest. Oh yes, but I've always been here. Probably they forgot the day of prayer and thought that the church was not open. Duncan did not comment, but he's got enough to confirm the problem stretched far beyond the church, but to the entire 6th block. Ads by PubFuture. This deserted church was deep in the neighborhood. Just from the appearance alone, it has been abandoned for more than 10 years. For ordinary people in this world, churches are not only a place of spiritual solace but also a functional facility for maintaining regional security, defending against evil forces after nightfall, and healing for many civilians after suffering from mental problems or nightmares. Such a critical facility has been abandoned for 11 years. Yet the residents of the 6th block did not feel the need to report this. Imagine if a community has been cut off from water and electricity for 11 years, but the locals do not find anything wrong with it. Then when outsiders speak about the matter, they would only comment about it being strange. Now, how freaky does that sound? As for the nun in this church, Duncan still had no idea what sort of intention this humanoid ash had in mind. Was she dangerous? At least from the conversation thus far, it's not hostile. In fact, it's so far off that it's strange. It's like the nun had fallen into a state of derision. He confirmed this by asking several questions back to back and got the same answer repeatedly. She's sane, but not much. Do you want to pray? Or do you need help with calming your mind and driving away evil spirits? The nun asked with a smile and a soft voice. Thank you, but there's no need. Duncan shook his head, then looked around, and asked casually, by the way, where are the guards of this church? Every church should have guards, even the smallest community church in the ghetto does to deal with general threats. The guardians, they are resting in the church, and they won't show up until after nightfall. The nun's smile remained unchanged. Are you looking for the guardians for something? Duncan didn't answer, but his gaze slowly swept over the benches beside the nun. In his field of vision, the phantoms of the fire burned everything, and the ashes and ruins were superimposed on the brightly lit church like overlapping films. In the other dimension of that superposition, there was no shortage of scorched bodies. Are the guards resting there? Duncan raised his hand and pointed not far away, but in Shirley's eyes, there were only 2 rows of empty benches. The nun froze for a moment, looked in the direction of Duncan's finger, and only spoke after a moment of delay. Shish. They're sleeping. Ads by PubFuture. Duncan hummed and continued asking, can we look around? Of course, the church is open for visits. The nun nodded lightly. Please take care of yourself then. I will continue to pray here. If you need anything, do call me. After saying this, the strange nun actually turned around and walked towards the statue of the sacred goddess not far away, completely leaving Duncan and Shirley to their own bidding. It wasn't until the nun left that Shirley, who had been nervous the entire time, suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. She couldn't care less about being afraid of Duncan at this time because the ubiquitous weird atmosphere in the church had already made Dog restless and agitated. A strange sense of tension was directly passing into her mind through the spiritual connection, making her subconsciously move closer to Duncan. What the hell is going on with this place? Why does this nun feel so creepy? She obviously looks normal, but nothing seems to be normal. There seem to be 2 churches here, Duncan explained simply. One has burned down, and the other is still intact. They are superimposed on this time and space together, and the nun in the church, she's neither dead nor alive. Shirley was stunned, and after half a minute, she whispered in confusion and astonishment, what do you mean? Duncan glanced at her. When we get back, you better read some books. If you don't know how I can teach you. Without waiting for Shirley's answer, he marched straight for the depths of the chapel. As the nun said, the church was open for visits, so of course he will visit at will. Shirley blinked in shock but quickly hurried after seeing the man leaving her behind. They bypassed the benches and swung around the goddess statue, during of which, the praying nun never once raised her head like a devoted servant of God. It's as if she's completely forgotten the visitors here, maintaining the same posture of 11 years. This caused Duncan to pay closer attention though. He watched the humanoid ash wriggling around as the tiny embers fell from the domed roof, just like fallen leaves from a tree. Then, a spark jolted in his heart out of the blue, causing him to flick his head up at the statue and blink. The icon of the storm goddess, there's a rift at the head. In this brief moment, Duncan finally caught a glimpse of the truth behind this superimposed fractured world. Through the rift in the head of this sacred statue, there's a faint light coming through. It's chaotic, mad even, just like a terrifying slit of a mad god's pupil peering through from the void. Whatever holy aura that lingered in the statue had long disappeared, replaced by the dark, vile powers of whatever evil that lurked here. In the next second, the terrifying scene disappeared without a trace, and the icon of Gomona continued to stand quietly on the pedestal, her majestic image exuding the reassuring glow of a goddess. N-O-V-E, in .c Om. Are you going to pray to the goddess? The nun, who was kneeling and praying, suddenly opened her eyes and asked the man. Chapter 150 Inches The Secret in the Underground Sanctuary. Are you going to pray to the goddess? Truth be told, in this instant, Duncan's instinctive reaction was that there was something wrong with the storm goddess Gomona. The cause must be because of the sinister side of the god, which led to this terrifying shadow taking hold inside the city-state. This distortion was the evidence. But the next second, he had another suspicion. If there was really something wrong with the storm goddess Gomona, then why were the other churches in the city normal? It wasn't that he had seen other storm churches, there were community churches near the antique shop and churches next to the original Maritime Museum. Even if he hadn't gone in to check it out, he had wandered around the neighborhood, and the aura released by those churches. It was obviously different from this eerie church in front of him. He also had contact with other clergies, including the most low-level priests and guardians, as well as the inquisitor-like Vanna, who was at the apex of the city-state. From what he could tell, these people who served the goddess of the storm were all normal, even more determined and clear-thinking than most. He ignored the nun and looked up at the statue. After the glimpse just now, the strange rift in the head of the statue did not appear again. Even in the other picture of the church, the spot was nothing more than a charred mess. He couldn't find any evidence of that rift anywhere again. Duncan frowned. The weirdness of this church was obviously a special case. Assuming the fault didn't lie with the storm goddess herself, then what he saw could only be interpreted as an evil force trying to use this chapel as a node to invade reality. But what exactly is that? The shape of that rift seems to have nothing to do with the evil sun god, and it is completely unrelated to the sun fragment. If I had to say it, the swirling chaotic light reminds me of the bottom levels of the vanished. Ads by PubFuture. Are you going to pray to the goddess? The nun's voice came again. She was neither impatient nor urging, but as if some keyword was triggered, she began to repeat this question over and over again when Duncan and Shirley stood beside the statue. Shirley seemed a little overwhelmed and instinctively looked to Duncan, who finally responded at this moment, "Are you praying to your goddess?" This should be an unquestionable question, and any normal believer would give a clear and affirmative answer at this point. Yet, the nun's reaction made Shirley's eyes widen in shock. I don't know. The nun shook her head calmly as if she didn't feel anything wrong with her response. "I'm just praying, and he told me to pray here." Duncan immediately frowned. Who is he? The great existence, the nun smiled. Shirley felt a chill running down her back due to the nun's gentle smile. "I don't pray to any gods," Duncan said lightly, quietly pulling Shirley back half a step from the range of the prayer table, "including the goddess from your mouth." "Oh, that's a shame." The nun sighed softly, then bowed her head again, ignoring Duncan and Shirley. Duncan stared at the wriggling mass of humanoid ash for a few seconds, confirmed that the ash had stopped paying them heed before turning elsewhere. The chapel was limited in size and had few areas to hide, except for the main hall dedicated to prayers and service. There were only a few rooms connected to the main hall aside from the underground crypt. Duncan first took Shirley to check the surrounding rooms but found nothing worth caring about. Finally, they came before a staircase to the basement at the end of a corridor outside the main hall. Are we really going down there? Looking at the dark stairs in front of her, Shirley was obviously a little uneasy and glanced backward at the brightly lit hall. Will that strange nun suddenly charge over? Ads by PubFuture. That nun is obviously trapped in the main hall and can't get too far from the statue. Duncan shook his head. But if she does charge over, then we can only fight back. That thing can hardly be called a living being anymore. Shirley gulped. She was usually very bold and courageous, but no matter how bold she was, this was the first time she had ran to a chapel of the Storm Church and did something so exciting. It's more than what her heart could accommodate. But she knew better than to refuse. She still had no idea which was more dangerous, a nun who had mutated from a mortal or a shadow from subspace. At this time, Duncan suddenly said something again, which made Shirley's hard-earned determination to sway again. By the way, summon dog out. Shirley's eyes widened instantly. Huh. Summon dog. In the Church of the Storm Goddess. NOBJN.C. Ohm. I'm afraid this is no longer the Storm Goddess's territory. Duncan shook his head. It's hard to say what exactly is in charge of this place now, but don't worry about summoning dog. You see, even though I am standing here, nothing is happening to me. In fact, I suspect this church is more suited for dog than anywhere else in the city right now. When Shirley thought about it, she felt that this was quite a reasonable theory. Of course, the main reason was that she did not dare to disagree, so she obediently raised her right arm and summoned her partner out into the real world. Pitch black flames swirled upwards like smoke, forming and taking on the shape of a dark hound in an instant. As soon as the summoning process was over, Dog skillfully bowed under Duncan's feet, his skeletal tail wagging at a Mark 5 speed of a fan. Greetings, you're great. Okay, you don't have to perform this set every time. Duncan interrupted the undead hound and waved him off. It's bad enough he had to deal with a noisy goat head back on the vanished, he doesn't need another on land. You should be able to feel it too already. Take a look. Tell me what you see in this church with that eye of yours. Dog properly got up from the ground and turned to peer down the dark staircase leading to the crypts. It's really an evil place. The hound's voice was hoarse and low, it's dizzy to even look at. After speaking this, he paused as if making a further judgment. Then turning back to face Duncan, he explained his findings. It's somewhat similar to the situation of the abandoned factory from before, but it's much more distorted here. I'm afraid the distortion is already approaching the threshold of what reality can bear. There's no mistaking it. The source of the veiled curtain must be here. Ads by PubFuture. So the distortion is already approaching the threshold of the real world. No wonder I can observe it directly with my eyes too. Duncan nodded nonchalantly, and his gaze fell on the stairs up ahead. The entire church has been checked. Now all that remains is the basement. According to the layout of most storm churches in the city, the area is what the clergies call the underground church. I'm starting to get excited. Dog shook his ugly head, the chains around his neck rattling. For the first time in my life, I broke into the forbidden land of the Storm Church. I wonder what's down there. Shirley shot a weird look at Dog's drooling expression. Can you 4x stop acting like a pedophile who's ready to break into the women's bathroom? Dog. Duncan ignored the combination of these two. He had already bypassed Dog and started going down the stairs. Eventually, he came to an entrance, which should lead into the underground sanctuary. As a small community church, the so-called underground church here was nothing more than a spacious crypt, and the door to the underground area was an oak door reinforced with steel frames and sacred runes. Duncan placed his hand on the door, pushed it slightly, and found that it was not locked. However, when he continued to drive forward, he felt some resistance, like something had blocked it from the other side. There's something across the door. Duncan stepped back slightly, observing the dark oak door in front of him. For some reason, when he came to the door of the underground sanctuary, the strange superimposition scene subsided, and all he saw in front of him was this door. It seems that the two branches of reality have completed their convergence here, leaving only the one reality as the truth. Do you want to smash the door open? Shirley followed from behind. She had already picked up the chain in her hand with Dog ready by her side. Specifically, the pair had taken on the meteor hammer stance like they used on the Suntists during that gathering. Quote. You may spoil the clues. Duncan stopped the dog-wielding girl who was about to use traditional arts to solve the problem. Instead, he put a hand on the rune-strewn door and ignited a small flame between his fingers to follow the grooves. Theoretically, this door should be some sort of supernatural item. In the next second, the blessed temple door had turned into firewood for the ghost fire. With the green flame burning rapidly, the gate faithfully carried out the master's order. It burned itself. And as the door was wiped out, the thing that was against the door on the opposite side had revealed itself to the party by falling to the ground with a plop. It was a nun in a black gown, scarred, still holding a sword in her hand, and glaring angrily at something in the darkness even though she had died. Shirley saw the other party's face clearly, and a chill instantly rose from the bottom of her heart. Wah! That nun we saw just now,